Rain hammered the warehouse windows as she stood still. 20, wrists cuffed, pretending to be calm. A man in a black suit circled. Her father named a number, 200,000. 5 black cars outside. Strip, he said. She raised her chin. No. 2 men advanced. Door slammed hard. Silk voices, steel rooms, no witnesses. Some mistakes have no way back. The rain hammered against the windows of the downtown warehouse like bullets against steel. Inside, fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across concrete floors stained with decades of silence. Isabella stood in the center of the empty space, her 20-year-old frame trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of what was about to happen. Her father, Frank, paced behind her with the restless energy of a man who had already made his peace with hell. She's young, clean, never been touched by the business. Frank's voice echoed off the walls, each word a nail in Isabella's coffin. The handcuffs around her wrists weren't necessary. Where could she run in a city that belonged to men like the one standing in the shadows across from them? Vincent Torino emerged from the darkness like smoke given form. 45 years old, silver threading through black hair, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars. His footsteps were measured, deliberate. Each click of Italian leather against concrete announced power that needed no introduction. He circled Isabella slowly, studying her like she was livestock at auction. Your debt was 200,000, Frank. Vincent's voice was silk wrapped around razor wire. This covers half. Frank's hands shook as he lit another cigarette. She's worth more than that, Mr. Torino. Look at her. Smart, educated, speaks 3 languages. I'm not buying a secretary. Vincent stopped directly in front of Isabella. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, but she could feel the weight of his stare. Strip. The command hung in the air like poison gas. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. Frank stepped forward, some fragment of paternal instinct still flickering. Now wait, just a... Vincent's hand moved to his jacket. Not threatening, not aggressive. Simply present. Frank's words died in his throat. In the silence that followed, Isabella could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She raised her chin, meeting Vincent's eyes for the first time. Dark, empty, like looking into deep water at midnight. No. The word came out stronger than she felt. Vincent's eyebrows rose slightly, surprise or perhaps amusement. For 30 seconds, nobody moved. Then Vincent nodded to 2 men who had been standing so still they might have been furniture. They stepped forward. The dress stays on, Vincent said quietly. For now. He turned to Frank. We're done here. Your debt is transferred. Don't let me see you in this city again. Frank stubbed out his cigarette with shaking fingers. He didn't look at Isabella as he walked toward the exit. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't apologize. The warehouse door slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid. Isabella was alone with monsters who wore human faces. Vincent's phone buzzed. He answered without taking his eyes off her. Marcus? Yes, she's here. Bring the car around. He ended the call, slipped the phone back into his pocket. Isabella Romano, 20 years old. Psychology major before your father's gambling destroyed your family's finances. Clean record, no addictions, no boyfriends worth mentioning. He paused. Did you really think I'd make this purchase without research? The casual violation of her privacy hit harder than a slap. Every detail of her life had been catalogued, evaluated, priced. She was merchandise that happened to breathe. What do you want from me? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Vincent studied her for another long moment. Walk. It wasn't a request. Isabella moved toward the exit on unsteady legs, Vincent's presence behind her like heat from a fire. Outside, a black sedan waited in the rain. The interior smelled of leather and something else, something metallic, that made her stomach turn. As they pulled away from the warehouse, Isabella caught her reflection in the window. A stranger stared back at her. Someone who belonged to Vincent Torino now. The mansion sat behind iron gates like a beautiful prison. Gothic architecture twisted into modern lines. All sharp angles and dark windows that reflected nothing. Isabella counted 7 security cameras on the approach alone. How many eyes were watching her that she couldn't see? Vincent led her through marble halls lined with art that probably cost more than her father's debt. Everything was pristine, cold, untouched. Like a museum where the exhibits were still breathing. They stopped at a heavy oak door. Your room. Vincent opened it, revealing a space larger than her family's entire apartment. Four-poster bed, private bathroom, walk-in closet already filled with clothes in her exact size. A golden cage with thread count that cost more per yard than minimum wage workers made in a week. The rules are simple, Vincent continued, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. You don't leave without permission. You don't make phone calls without supervision. You don't ask questions about my business. He paused at the threshold. Break these rules and we'll discuss consequences. The door closed with a soft click. Isabella heard the lock turn. She was alone in luxury that felt like suffocation. On the nightstand sat a single white envelope, her name written in Vincent's precise handwriting across the front. Inside, a note. Dinner is at 8. Dress appropriately. Don't disappoint me. Isabella sank onto the silk bedspread, staring at the words until they blurred. Somewhere in this house, Vincent Torino was planning her future. But as she touched the bruises her father's desperation had left on her wrists, Isabella Romano began planning something else entirely. Survival. And maybe, if she was very careful and very lucky, revenge. The clock on the mantel chimed 7:30. Time to discover what appropriately dressed meant in the vocabulary of a man who collected people like rare wines. Isabella stood, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to meet her captor at his own table. The game was just beginning. The dining room stretched before Isabella like a cathedral of wealth and intimidation. A mahogany table that could seat 20 occupied the center, though only 2 places were set. One at the head, one to the right. Crystal glasses caught the light from an overhead chandelier that probably cost more than most people's houses. The silverware gleamed with the cold perfection of surgical instruments. Vincent was already seated when she entered at exactly 8 o'clock. He had changed from his warehouse suit into something darker, more expensive. His eyes tracked her movement across the marble floor without a flicker of expression. Isabella had chosen a simple black dress from the wardrobe. Modest neckline, sleeves that covered her bruises. Nothing that could be interpreted as invitation or defiance. Sit. The command was soft, almost conversational. Isabella pulled out the chair to his right, hyper-aware of every sound she made. The scrape of wood against marble, the whisper of fabric as she settled into place, the controlled rhythm of her own breathing. A server appeared from nowhere. An older woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. She placed a bowl of soup before each of them without making eye contact. The steam rose between Isabella and Vincent like incense at a funeral mass. Maria has worked for my family for 30 years, Vincent said, picking up his spoon. She understands the value of discretion. Isabella watched Maria retreat into the shadows beyond the dining room's circle of light. How many young women had sat in this chair before her? How many had left this house alive? You're not eating. Vincent's observation cut through her spiraling thoughts. Isabella lifted her spoon with hands that didn't quite shake. The soup was exquisite, some kind of bisque that tasted like money and suffering. She swallowed carefully, aware that Vincent was studying every movement she made. Tell me about your psychology studies. His voice carried the casual tone of a man making polite conversation, but Isabella could feel the weight behind it. Every answer would be catalogued, analyzed, used. I was interested in behavioral analysis, understanding why people make the choices they do. She kept her voice steady, neutral, particularly in high-stress situations. Vincent's lips curved in what might have been a smile. Useful field of study. And what did you learn about choice? The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to spring. Isabella set down her spoon, met his gaze directly. That most people think they have more choices than they actually do. Interesting. Vincent leaned back in his chair, swirling wine in a glass she hadn't seen him pour. And what choices do you think you have now? I think you'd like me to believe I have none. But you don't believe that. It wasn't a question. Isabella felt something shift in the air between them. A recognition, perhaps. Or a challenge being issued. I think believing you have no choices is how people survive situations like this. But I also think it's how they lose themselves. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then he lifted his wine glass. To survival, then. He didn't offer her wine. The message was clear. He controlled everything in this house, down to what passed her lips. Isabella returned to her soup, tasting ash instead of luxury. My son will join us for breakfast tomorrow. Vincent's voice carried a new note, something almost like warmth. Anthony. He's 23, studying law at Columbia. He knows nothing about my business, and I intend to keep it that way. The revelation hit Isabella like cold water. Vincent Torino had a son, someone he cared about protecting, someone he wanted to keep clean. The information felt valuable, though she couldn't yet say why. You'll be presented as my ward, the daughter of a business associate who needed temporary housing after a family tragedy. Vincent's eyes never left her face. You'll maintain this fiction at all times when Anthony is present. Any deviation will be corrected. And what happens when he asks questions? Young men studying law tend to be curious. Then you'll give him answers that satisfy his curiosity without endangering his innocence. Vincent set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. I'm sure someone with your educational background can manage appropriate responses. Maria reappeared to clear the soup bowls, replacing them with plates of what looked like expertly prepared salmon. The fish was arranged with artistic precision, garnished with microgreens that probably cost more per ounce than gold. Isabella cut a small piece, chewed mechanically. Everything in this house was perfect, beautiful, and tainted. My wife died when Anthony was born. The words came without warning, delivered in the same tone Vincent might use to comment on the weather. Complications during delivery. The doctor said there was nothing they could have done, but I disagreed. I found the attending physician 3 months later. Isabella's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. The casual admission of murder delivered over dinner felt surreal, like something from a nightmare that followed the rules of etiquette. Anthony believes his mother died peacefully. He visits her grave every Sunday with fresh flowers. White roses, they were her favorite. Vincent cut his salmon with surgical precision. It's important that children have something pure to hold on to, don't you think? The question felt loaded with meaning Isabella couldn't decipher. Was this a threat? A confession? A glimpse into whatever passed for Vincent Torino's soul? Yes, she managed. I think innocence should be protected when possible. When possible? Vincent repeated the phrase thoughtfully. An interesting qualification. Most people would say innocence should always be protected. Most people haven't been sold by their fathers to pay gambling debts. The words left Isabella's mouth before she could stop them. For a moment, the dining room fell completely silent. Even the soft classical music playing from hidden speakers seemed to pause. Vincent's dark eyes studied her with renewed interest. Bitter truth from such a young mouth. He dabbed his lips with a linen napkin. Tell me, Isabella. May I call you Isabella? What do you know about my business? I know you're the kind of man other men fear. I know you have enough money to buy people. I know you're careful about what your son sees. Isabella forced herself to maintain eye contact. Beyond that, I've tried not to think too hard about details. Wise. Curiosity can be dangerous in my world. Vincent pushed back from the table, though he'd barely touched his food. You'll find that ignorance is often a luxury I provide to those under my protection. Protection. The word felt like a lie wrapped in velvet. Isabella remained seated as Vincent stood, towering over her in the chandelier's light. Your first test begins tomorrow morning, he said, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced movements. Anthony comes home for the weekend. You'll have breakfast with us at 9. Dress appropriately. He's studying to be a lawyer, not a priest. The implications made Isabella's stomach clench. She was to be displayed, performed, presented as something she wasn't. Another lie in Vincent Torino's carefully constructed world. One more thing. Vincent paused at the dining room's entrance. Anthony believes in justice. He believes good people are rewarded and bad people are punished. He believes the system works. His smile was razor thin. I've spent considerable effort maintaining those beliefs. Don't disappoint me. Isabella sat alone in the vast dining room as Vincent's footsteps faded into the mansion's depths. Maria appeared again, clearing the remaining plates with efficient silence. Before she could leave, Isabella spoke. How many? Maria paused, not looking up from her task. How many what, miss? How many young women have sat in this chair? For a moment, Maria's composure cracked. Something ancient and tired flickered in her eyes. You're the first to ask that question, she said quietly. Then she was gone, leaving Isabella alone with the weight of being unprecedented in a house built on precedent. The chandelier cast dancing shadows on the walls, and somewhere in the mansion's upper floors a young man studied law books while his father planned Isabella's next performance. She pushed back from the table, stood on unsteady legs. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new lies to maintain, new pieces of herself to sacrifice for survival. But tonight, in the golden cage of her room, Isabella Romano would begin planning something Vincent Torino hadn't counted on. Something dangerous. Something that might cost her everything. something that might set them both free. Morning light filtered through bulletproof glass, casting geometric shadows across Isabella's gilded prison. She had barely slept, spending the night cataloging every detail of her room that might serve as weapon or escape route. The windows were sealed, reinforced. The bathroom mirror was polished metal, not glass. No sharp edges to work with. Even the hangers in the oversized closet were made of soft plastic. Vincent Torino thought of everything. At 8:30, Maria appeared with breakfast on a silver tray, toast cut into perfect triangles, fresh fruit arranged like a still life, coffee that smelled like it cost more per pound than Isabella's monthly college expenses. The older woman's eyes held the same tired weight from the night before. "The young master arrived an hour ago," Maria said, setting the tray on a marble side table. "He asked about you." Isabella's pulse quickened. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. Mr. Torino handles all communications regarding houseguests." Maria smoothed her apron with nervous hands. "But Anthony is observant. He notices things others miss." The warning was subtle but clear. Isabella would need to be perfect in her performance, flawless in her lies. One mistake could shatter the careful fiction Vincent had constructed around his son's innocence. "What's he like?" Isabella asked, reaching for the coffee cup. Maria paused at the door, her weathered face softening slightly. "He has his mother's heart, and his father's mind." The combination felt ominous. "Be careful, miss. Anthony sees goodness in people because he's never had reason to look deeper." After Maria left, Isabella stood before the full-length mirror and studied her reflection. The clothes in the wardrobe had been chosen with meticulous care. Expensive enough to suggest wealth, conservative enough to imply virtue. She selected a cream-colored blouse and navy skirt that fell just below her knees. Professional, innocent, the daughter of a business associate who needed temporary shelter. The breakfast room was smaller than the formal dining hall, though smaller was relative in a mansion where even the closets had better square footage than most apartments. Anthony Torino sat at a round table near floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked manicured gardens. He was younger than his 23 years suggested he would be, with his father's dark hair but lighter eyes, gray instead of obsidian. When he smiled as she entered, the expression transformed his entire face. "You must be Isabella." He stood immediately, extending his hand with old-world courtesy that felt genuine rather than performed. "I'm Anthony. Dad told me about your family's situation. I'm so sorry for your loss." The lie rolled off his tongue easily because he believed it completely. Isabella shook his hand, noting the calluses that suggested he worked with more than just law books. His grip was firm but not possessive, nothing like his father's calculated touches. "Thank you. Your father has been very generous." The words tasted like ash, but she managed to deliver them with appropriate gratitude. Vincent appeared in the doorway as if summoned by their conversation. In daylight, wearing a simple white shirt and dark pants, he looked almost normal, almost human. But Isabella could see the predator lurking beneath the paternal facade. "I trust you both slept well," Vincent said, settling into his chair with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to controlling every room he entered. "Like a baby," Anthony replied, already reaching for the coffee pot to serve Isabella before himself. "I was just telling Isabella how sorry I am about her father's accident." Accident. Isabella's throat tightened as she realized Vincent's chosen fiction. In Anthony's world, her father had died tragically rather than sold her to settle debts. The lie was cleaner, more palatable for a young man who believed in justice. "Traffic accidents are unfortunately common," Vincent said smoothly. Isabella's mother felt she needed time away from the city to process her grief. Naturally, I offered our guest room. The casual rewriting of her history was breathtaking in its scope. Vincent had transformed her mother's abandonment into protective grief, her father's betrayal into tragic death, her enslavement into generous hospitality. Anthony nodded sympathetically, completely convinced by the narrative. "How long will you be staying?" Anthony asked, passing Isabella a plate of fresh pastries that looked too beautiful to eat. "I'm not sure yet," Isabella replied carefully. "Your father says I can stay as long as needed." "Good. This house gets too quiet when it's just Dad and the staff." Anthony's smile was warm, uncomplicated. "Maybe you can talk him into actually using the library. He owns thousands of books but claims he's too busy to read them." Vincent's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Some of us have responsibilities that extend beyond academic pursuits." I know. The consulting business keeps you traveling constantly. Anthony turned to Isabella. Dad never talks about his work, but it must be important. Governments pay serious money for his strategic advice. Strategic advice. Isabella almost choked on her coffee. Vincent had transformed his criminal empire into legitimate consulting in his son's mind. The young man lived in a carefully constructed bubble, where his father was simply a successful businessman, rather than a murderer who collected debts in human currency. "What kind of law are you studying?" Isabella asked, desperate to shift the conversation away from Vincent's fictional career. Anthony's face lit up. "Criminal justice, with a focus on organized crime prosecution. I want to be a federal prosecutor eventually. Take down the mob families that have corrupted this city for generations." The irony was so thick, Isabella could taste it. Vincent's son wanted to destroy everything his father had built, completely unaware that he was living off blood money. Isabella glanced at Vincent, expecting to see anger or at least annoyance. Instead, she found something that looked almost like pride. "Anthony has always been idealistic," Vincent said, his voice carrying genuine affection. "He believes the system can be fixed from within." "Because it can be," Anthony replied with the passionate certainty of youth. "Look at the RICO prosecutions in New York. They've dismantled entire families. No one is untouchable anymore." Vincent's smile never wavered, but Isabella caught the flash of something darker in his eyes. How many of those prosecutions had he orchestrated himself, eliminating rivals while maintaining his own empire's secrecy? "Tell me about your psychology studies," Anthony continued, turning back to Isabella. "Dad mentioned you were analyzing behavioral patterns before everything happened." Isabella felt the weight of both men's attention. Every word would be evaluated, measured against the fiction Vincent had created. "I was particularly interested in cognitive dissonance, how people maintain contradictory beliefs when faced with uncomfortable truths." "Fascinating field," Anthony said, "especially relevant to criminal psychology, understanding why people choose to break the law, despite knowing the consequences." "Sometimes people don't feel like they have choices," Isabella replied carefully. "When someone holds power over your survival, moral decisions become luxury items most can't afford." Vincent's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Anthony nodded thoughtfully, completely missing the subtext that crackled between Isabella and his father. "But that's exactly why the justice system exists," Anthony said. "To protect people from those who would exploit their desperation. To ensure that power can't corrupt absolutely." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, Anthony's earnest idealism providing cover for the psychological warfare playing out between Isabella and Vincent. Every question felt like a test, every answer a potential trap. When Anthony finally excused himself to study for Monday's classes, Isabella felt exhausted from maintaining her performance. "You did well," Vincent said after his son's footsteps faded. "Anthony likes you. Is that good or bad for my life expectancy?" Vincent's laugh was genuinely amused. "My son's approval is always valuable currency in this house. But remember, his safety depends on his ignorance. Any attempt to enlighten him about reality will be treated as a direct threat to his life." The warning was delivered in the same conversational tone he'd used to discuss coffee preferences. Isabella understood perfectly. Anthony's innocence wasn't just valuable to Vincent. It was sacred, which meant it was also the perfect weapon, if she could figure out how to use it without destroying the young man she was already beginning to care about. Vincent stood, adjusting his shirt cuffs with practiced precision. "You have the afternoon free. Explore the house, familiarize yourself with your new environment. Dinner is at 7. Anthony will expect you to join us again." As Vincent left the breakfast room, Isabella remained seated, staring out at gardens that looked like paradise and felt like purgatory. Somewhere in this house, Anthony Torino studied cases about bringing down criminal empires, completely unaware that he was the beloved son of everything he'd sworn to destroy. The contradiction would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. Isabella stood, smoothed her skirt, and began her exploration of Vincent Torino's carefully constructed world. Every room she entered felt like a piece of evidence in a case that would never see trial. Every luxury reminded her of its true cost, and every camera she spotted, and there were many, reminded her that she was always being watched, always being evaluated, always being judged by a man who collected beautiful things and broke them when they disappointed him. The afternoon stretched ahead like a tightrope over an abyss, and somewhere at the end of it, Anthony Torino would return from his studies ready to continue his unknowing dance with the truth that could destroy them all. If you've made it this far into Isabella's story, you understand that some truths cut deeper than any blade. The psychological warfare between predator and prey rarely unfolds the way we expect. Sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted, and sometimes innocence becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. What do you think drives someone like Vincent to protect his son's ignorance so fiercely? Is it love, or is it just another form of control? Share your thoughts below, because stories like this live in the gray areas where simple answers don't exist. The mansion revealed its secrets slowly, like a woman undressing in shadows. Isabella spent the afternoon mapping Vincent's domain, cataloging weaknesses that might someday prove useful. The East Wing housed Anthony's rooms: scholarship trophies, law books, photographs of a young man who believed justice was possible. The West Wing belonged to Vincent. Sparse, controlled, every surface cleaned of personality except for a single framed photograph on his nightstand. A woman with kind eyes holding a newborn baby. Anthony's mother, frozen in the last moment before Vincent's world consumed her. The basement required a keycard Isabella didn't possess, but she memorized the location. Whatever Vincent kept below ground would be worth discovering. The kitchen staff moved through their routines with the efficiency of people who understood the cost of mistakes. 2 groundskeepers maintained the gardens with military precision. A chauffeur polished the black sedan that had carried her from the warehouse. Everyone avoided eye contact. Everyone knew the rules. At 6:30, Isabella returned to her room to prepare for dinner. A new dress hung in the closet, emerald green silk that hugged her curves without being vulgar. The message was clear. She was being displayed tonight. The question was for whom? Anthony was already seated when she entered the dining room, but he wasn't alone. A young woman with auburn hair and designer clothes sat beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm. She looked up as Isabella entered, green eyes assessing competition with practiced efficiency. "Isabella, meet Sarah," Anthony said, standing to pull out Isabella's chair. "My girlfriend, Sarah, this is Isabella Romano, the family friend I told you about." Sarah's smile was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to seem genuine, cool enough to establish territory. "How tragic about your father. Anthony told me about the accident." "Thank you." Isabella settled into her chair, hyper-aware of the dynamics shifting around the table. Sarah represented a variable Vincent hadn't controlled for, another innocent who might ask inconvenient questions. Vincent entered precisely at 7, his presence immediately commanding the room's attention. He surveyed the scene with calculating eyes before taking his seat. "Sarah, how pleasant to see you again. Mr. Torino." Sarah's voice carried the careful respect of someone who recognized power without understanding its source. "Thank you for having me. Anthony's friends are always welcome." Vincent's tone suggested the opposite was equally true. Dinner began with the usual choreographed perfection. Maria served courses that belonged in Michelin-starred restaurants, while conversation flowed over topics safe enough for mixed company. Sarah dominated the discussion, regaling them with stories from her internship at a prominent law firm. She was brilliant, ambitious, and completely unaware that she was dining with the enemy of everything she claimed to believe in. "I've been reading about the Torino construction case," Sarah said, cutting into her veal with surgical precision. "Fascinating how they managed to launder money through legitimate building contracts for 15 years before getting caught." Isabella's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Vincent's expression never changed, but something arctic entered his eyes. Anthony shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Different family entirely," Vincent said quietly. "No relation to us despite the shared name." "Of course," Sarah replied quickly, but Isabella caught the flicker of doubt in her expression. "Still, it's incredible how organized crime infiltrates legitimate businesses. Makes you wonder how many other companies are fronts." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Vincent continued eating as if discussing the weather, but Isabella could feel violence radiating from him like heat from a furnace. Sarah had unknowingly wandered into a minefield. "Sarah's thesis is on RICO prosecutions," Anthony explained, pride evident in his voice. "She's going to help me take down half the crime families in the city." "Admirable goals," Vincent said, "though sometimes the line between justice and vengeance becomes blurred." "How so?" Sarah challenged, her academic confidence overriding social instincts that should have warned her to stop talking. Vincent set down his wine glass with deliberate care. Young prosecutors often assume that destroying criminal organizations solves problems rather than creating new ones. Remove one family, and 3 others fight to fill the vacuum. The violence escalates. Innocent people die in crossfire that didn't exist before. So we should just let them operate? Sarah's voice carried the outrage of youth confronting compromise. I'm suggesting that some evils are preferable to the chaos that follows their elimination. Vincent's smile was razor thin. Stability has value even when built on imperfect foundations. Isabella watched Anthony's face as his father spoke. Confusion flickered there, followed by something that might have been recognition. For just a moment, the young man seemed to see his father clearly. Then the moment passed, rationalization rebuilding the walls around uncomfortable truth. Dad's always been philosophical about these things, Anthony said quickly. Corporate consulting gives you a different perspective on systemic problems. The lie came so easily that Isabella wondered if Anthony had been practicing it. How many conversations had ended this way, with the sun covering for observations that came too close to reality? Still, Sarah pressed, surely you agree that criminal organizations should face consequences for their actions? Vincent studied her for a long moment, and Isabella could practically see him deciding Sarah's fate. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of final judgment. I believe everyone faces consequences eventually. The question is whether those consequences serve justice or merely satisfy our need for revenge. He turned to Anthony. What do you think, son? Is justice about punishment or protection? The question hung in the air like a sword over Sarah's head. Anthony considered carefully before answering, unaware that his girlfriend's life might depend on his response. Protection, Anthony said finally. Justice should protect the innocent even if that means making difficult compromises with the guilty. Vincent's smile warmed slightly. Wise answer. Sarah opened her mouth to argue, but Isabella kicked her under the table. The young woman's eyes widened in surprise and something that might have been understanding. She had walked to the edge of a cliff without realizing it. Isabella's warning had pulled her back just in time. The remainder of dinner passed without incident. Sarah seemed subdued, perhaps finally recognizing that she was swimming in deeper waters than she had realized. When Anthony walked her to her car, Vincent and Isabella were left alone in the dining room's oppressive silence. Bright girl, Vincent said, swirling wine in his glass. Dangerous combination of intelligence and ignorance. Are you going to kill her? Isabella asked bluntly. Vincent's laugh was genuinely amused. Nothing so dramatic, but Sarah's academic curiosity needs boundaries. A conversation with her thesis advisor about shifting research focus should suffice, perhaps towards corporate law instead of criminal prosecution. The casual manipulation of an innocent woman's career chilled Isabella more than outright threats might have. Vincent destroyed lives with phone calls and suggestions, wielding influence like a surgeon wielded scalpels. You're protecting Anthony, Isabella observed. I'm protecting everyone. Vincent stood, smoothing his shirt with practiced motions. Anthony's happiness requires Sarah's continued existence. Sarah's continued existence requires a career change. Simple mathematics. And if she refuses to change focus? Vincent's smile was arctic. Then Anthony will discover that his girlfriend died tragically in a car accident. Grief will make him more dependent on family support. Loss will teach him that the world is dangerous and unpredictable. The lesson will serve him well in his future legal career. The casual planning of murder delivered in the tone of discussing weekend plans made Isabella's stomach clench. Vincent had contingencies for contingencies, webs within webs. Every person in his orbit was a chess piece to be moved or removed as strategy dictated. You're teaching me, Isabella realized. This whole dinner was a lesson. Very good. Vincent's approval felt like poison honey. Lesson 1, everyone has pressure points. Sarah's is her career. Anthony's is his sense of justice. What do you think yours might be? Isabella met his gaze steadily. You tell me. Still determining that. But I suspect it involves the safety of people you care about. Vincent moved toward the dining room exit, then paused. Be careful who you allow yourself to care about in this house, Isabella. Affection becomes liability very quickly in my world. The warning was clear. Caring about Anthony or anyone else would give Vincent another weapon to use against her. But as Isabella sat alone in the vast dining room, she realized the lesson had cut both ways. Vincent's obvious love for his son wasn't strength. It was weakness. And weakness in the right hands could become opportunity. Anthony returned from seeing Sarah off, settling back into his chair with the relieved expression of someone whose girlfriend had survived dinner with his father. He didn't know how literal that survival had been. "Sorry about Sarah's questions," Anthony said. "She gets excited about her research sometimes. Your father handled it well." Isabella chose her words carefully. "He seems very protective of family privacy." "He has to be. Corporate consulting involves a lot of confidential information. Government contracts, international negotiations. Dad's paranoid about security because he has to be." The rationalization was so complete that Isabella almost believed it herself. Anthony had constructed an entire mythology around his father's business, transforming murder into methodology, crime into consulting. The young man was Vincent's greatest creation, a perfect fiction that believed in its own reality. "Isabella?" Anthony's voice carried concern. "You look tired. Everything okay?" She managed to smile. "Just adjusting to everything. Your family's kindness has been overwhelming." Kindness. The word tasted like ashes, but Anthony beamed as if she had paid him the greatest compliment. In his world, his father's hospitality was generosity rather than ownership. His girlfriend's continued breathing was coincidence rather than calculated mercy. As Isabella excused herself for the evening, she wondered how long innocence could survive in a house built on blood. Anthony believed in justice. Sarah believed in truth, and both beliefs made them weapons in Vincent's hands. The education was just beginning, and the most important lesson remained unspoken. In Vincent Torino's world, love was the most dangerous luxury of all. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's dinner interrogation, and the mansion had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Almost. Isabella had learned to navigate the unspoken rules, to smile at appropriate moments, to deflect Anthony's increasingly perceptive questions about her past. But normalcy in Vincent Torino's world was like calm water over hidden rocks, deceptive and dangerous. The call came at 2 in the morning. Isabella woke to the sound of Vincent's voice echoing through the halls, sharp commands delivered in rapid Italian. Emergency, crisis, blood in the water. She pressed her ear to the door, catching fragments of conversation that painted a picture of empire under siege. Someone had betrayed Vincent. Someone was going to pay. By morning, the house had transformed. Additional security materialized overnight. Men with dead eyes and expensive suits who stationed themselves at every entrance. The staff moved with nervous efficiency, speaking only when necessary. Anthony emerged from his room looking confused and slightly afraid. "Dad's in emergency meetings all day," he told Isabella over a breakfast neither of them touched. "Something about a government contract going sideways. He said I should take you into the city, show you around, get you out of the house for a while." The suggestion felt like an order wrapped in concern. Vincent wanted them away from whatever storm was brewing. Isabella nodded, grateful for any excuse to escape the mansion's increasingly oppressive atmosphere. The city revealed itself in layers as Anthony played tour guide. Coffee shops where he'd studied for the LSAT. The courthouse where he hoped to practice law someday. Parks where he'd played as a child, blissfully unaware of how his father paid for the privilege. Anthony's New York was clean, hopeful, untouched by the shadows that funded his education. They were walking through Central Park when Isabella noticed the surveillance. 2 men in casual clothes maintaining careful distance. Another team across the path. Vincent's protection or someone else's hunters. She couldn't tell which, but the weight of being watched pressed against her shoulders like phantom hands. "Tell me about your mother," Isabella said, hoping to distract Anthony from the tension she felt building around them. Anthony's face softened. She was a teacher. Elementary school. Dad says she could make anyone believe they were capable of greatness. He touched his jacket pocket where he kept her picture. "She would have loved you." The casual kindness in his voice hit Isabella harder than any of Vincent's calculated cruelties. Anthony had inherited his mother's heart along with his father's mind, and the combination made him dangerously naive about the world's capacity for evil. "Do you ever wonder what she would think of your father's business?" Isabella asked carefully. Anthony was quiet for a long moment, watching children play on distant swings. "Sometimes, but Dad says she knew the consulting work was demanding, that she understood the sacrifices required for success." He turned to Isabella, gray eyes troubled. "Why do you ask?" Before Isabella could answer, her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "Central Park Boathouse. Alone. 5 minutes." Come, or Anthony dies. The world tilted sideways. Isabella's hands shook as she read the message again, hoping the words might rearrange themselves into something less terrifying. But the threat remained, stark and simple. Someone had been watching them. Someone had weapons trained on Anthony right now. I need to use the restroom, Isabella said, forcing her voice to remain steady. There's a facility by the boathouse. Wait here? Anthony nodded, settling onto a bench with his law textbook. Take your time. I need to review these case studies anyway. The walk to the boathouse felt like a death march. Isabella's mind raced through possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. Vincent's enemies using her to strike at him. Federal agents trying to flip her into an informant. Some other player in games she didn't understand making moves she couldn't predict. The boathouse was nearly empty this early in the day. Isabella found her contact at a corner table overlooking the water. A woman in her 50s with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. FBI, probably. Or DEA. Some government agency that specialized in hunting men like Vincent Torino. Sit. The command was delivered without preamble or introduction. Isabella obeyed, every nerve-ending screaming danger. Agent Sarah Martinez, FBI Organized Crime Task Force. The woman slid a badge across the table, then withdrew it before Isabella could examine it closely. We know who you are, Isabella Romano. We know how you ended up in Vincent Torino's house, and we know you want out. You don't know anything, Isabella replied, but her voice betrayed her uncertainty. Your father owed $200,000 to the Castellano family. Vincent bought the debt and you along with it. You've been living in his mansion for 3 weeks, playing house with his son while learning the inner workings of a criminal empire. Martinez leaned forward. We know everything, Isabella. The question is whether you're going to help us save Anthony or watch him die. The words hit like physical blows. Isabella gripped the table's edge to keep from falling. Anthony doesn't know anything about his father's business, doesn't he? Martinez opened a tablet, swiped to surveillance footage. Anthony entering the courthouse with Sarah, both of them laughing. Anthony meeting with various law professors. Anthony having lunch with a man Isabella didn't recognize. Someone with hard eyes and expensive clothes. Your boyfriend's been asking questions about organized crime prosecutions, specifically about cases involving his father's associates. Isabella's blood ran cold. He's writing his thesis, it's academic research. Maybe it started that way. But Anthony Torino isn't stupid and he's not blind. He's been connecting dots for months. Martinez swiped to another image. Anthony photographing documents in what looked like Vincent's study. He found his father's real business records 2 weeks ago. The revelation shattered Isabella's understanding of everything. Anthony knew, had known for weeks, possibly longer. His innocent questions, his academic focus on organized crime, his protection of her, all of it had been performance. What does he want? Isabella asked, though she already suspected the answer. Justice. Anthony plans to turn evidence against his father to the FBI. Unfortunately, Vincent discovered his son's intentions yesterday. That's why the house went into lockdown. That's why you're both being watched. Martinez closed the tablet. Vincent Torino is going to kill his own son rather than let him testify, unless you help us prevent it. The world felt like it was collapsing around Isabella's ears. Everything she'd believed about Anthony's innocence had been lies. Everything she'd assumed about Vincent's love for his son was about to be tested in the cruelest way possible. What do you want me to do? Get Anthony out of the city. Tonight. There's a safe house upstate where he can finish gathering evidence while under federal protection. Martinez slid a phone across the table. Use this to contact me when you're ready. But understand, once you make this choice, there's no going back. Vincent will consider you a traitor. He'll hunt you both until one of you is dead. Isabella stared at the phone, weighing impossible choices. Betray Vincent and risk everything on the FBI's protection, or stay silent and watch Anthony die for crimes his father committed. Either path led through darkness with no guarantee of dawn. How long do I have to decide? Vincent's people are closing in on Anthony's investigation. Based on our intelligence, you have maybe 12 hours before he makes his move. Martinez stood, leaving money on the table for coffee neither of them had touched. Choose wisely, Isabella. Some opportunities don't come twice. The agent disappeared into the crowd, leaving Isabella alone with a decision that would define the rest of her life. Through the boathouse windows, she could see Anthony still reading on his bench, surrounded by invisible watchers from multiple agencies. The young man who'd shown her kindness was living on borrowed time, and only she could determine whether that time extended beyond tonight. Isabella picked up the FBI phone, weighing it against her own device. 2 different futures balanced in her palms, 2 different betrayals, 2 different kinds of justice. In the distance, Anthony looked up from his book and waved, smiling with the trust of someone who believed she was his friend rather than his father's prisoner. The decision felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that jumping meant either flying or falling, but staying meant watching the ground crumble away regardless. Isabella closed her eyes, thought of Vincent's cold smile and Anthony's warm laugh, then made the choice that would either save them all or destroy everything she'd tried to protect. The phone felt heavy in her pocket as she walked back toward Anthony, each step carrying her further from innocence and closer to whatever justice looked like. When love and loyalty stood on opposite sides of an unwinnable war, Anthony looked up as she approached, concern flickering in his gray eyes. "Everything okay? You look pale." Isabella managed a smile that felt like glass breaking. "Just tired. This has all been overwhelming. Want to head home? Dad should be done with his meetings by now." Home. The word tasted like poison and promise, safety and trap. Isabella nodded, knowing that whatever happened next, the mansion would never feel like home again, for any of them. We've reached the end of Isabella's impossible choice, standing at the crossroads where love and survival demand different prices. These moments, when ordinary people are forced to choose between protecting those they care about and saving themselves, reveal truths about human nature that comfort and safety never could. What would you have done in Isabella's position? When loyalty to one person means betraying another, how do we measure the weight of different kinds of love? Share your thoughts below. And if this story has made you think differently about the choices we make when everything we care about hangs in the balance, consider subscribing to join our community. Sometimes the most important conversations happen in the spaces between the words, in the silences where difficult truths live. Thank you for taking this journey into the shadows where morality becomes a luxury few can afford.